Good morning, Morweni, Sawubona, Guten Morgen, Buongiorno, or as we say in Cape Town, how's it? Guys, yes, I'm one of those Cape Townians. I'm sure that thanks for the intro. Very excited, all of you, to have the market research guy up first. Very excited. The good news, people, is I'm not really a market researcher. There's a whole bunch of... I'm glad that the winemakers aren't here, because half of them would be sitting in the room going, aren't you the photographer guy? Because I really have spent most of my life as a journalist and as a storyteller. But I've landed up in this world of consumer research, and that's my world that you see up there. Trying to answer people's questions about what and where and who and when and how, and that's what the research that we do is all about. I'll give you a little broader view of it in a second. But I spent the majority of my life as a writer believing that this was the mantra by which we should all live. You know, content is king. I'm sure you all heard that. I'm sure some of you who've been to journalism school would have heard it. Content is king. And I spent almost 30 years of my life believing that mantra. And it still is true. But then when I got into the world of data, I realized that maybe there was just one little letter there that could be changed. And it kind of changes the perspective on the world, right? Because context, we think, is incredibly important. I think when it comes to wine, the idea of context and the idea of understanding things that are happening behind the scenes is really important. So, a couple of weeks ago, months ago, can't remember, Andrew Shelley and I were catching up. We used to know each other from the music industry a couple of decades ago, and now we both land up thinking that we know something about wine. Well, he actually does. And Andrew said, well, I was telling him about provincial demographics. In other words, you know, a lot of the work we do is trying to tell brands and services down in Cape Town that, you know, there is a different market that exists in the rest of the country. And he said, yeah, it's like the wine industry is actually like Europe, you know, like France and England. You've got France, which is a wine producer and consumer, and you've got the UK, which is just a consumer. And the way French wine is marketed in those two places is really different. South Africa is very, very similar, and yet we don't necessarily market the wine differently. Okay, that was the basis. So he thought it'd be a good idea to get me to stand up here and just tell you a few stories that would contextualize the day a little bit. Okay, that's all I'm here for. I don't pretend to know anything about malolactic fermentation. I can barely spell it. I can barely smell it. I just came up with that right now. Okay, so let me start with some context and explain to you as a Cape Townian what one of the challenges is for the industry. If you ask Cape Townians what South Africa looks like, this is the traditional map. Okay? Down in the bottom left-hand corner, you've got the mountain, obviously. Place called Langebaan, where most of us go on holiday, and another holiday place called Hermanus. And then you can't actually read it, I'm sure, but there's this little red strip, that's the winelands. Yeah? And then there's a little yellow strip, those are the pretty mountains. Okay, that's Cape Town. That's where all the wine's produced. Top side there's a place called Swaziland. We think there's Dagga jungles up there, we're not sure. And here's the key to understanding this context. The rest of the country is Joburg. Now here's the challenge, guys. Wine is made by that little corner in the bottom left-hand side, and really there are a lot of companies and brands, big brands. It's not just wine producers. There are major financial institutions who don't really understand that that's not the way the world looks. Okay. So how else can we start understanding South Africa? So I'm going to bounce around a little bit here, but these are just thoughts for you to bear in mind today as we keep going. This is the picture of the world that we present to corporate South Africa. We think there are about 43 million adults in South Africa right now. 43 million. There's 63 million people in the total country, which makes us now the 25th biggest country in the world. There's a lot of people in South Africa. Those 43 million adults earn about 3.8 trillion rand a year. That comes from Treasury South Africa. Okay, so that's a known figure. That's formal market income, right? Taxable income. If you take the 43 million adults, and sorry, this is the only slide, I promise, where there's very small stuff, but like hopefully it's big enough for you to see. If you take the 43 million adults and you divide them in terms of households by household income, you get this picture, right? 70% of all adults in South Africa, 30 million adults, live in households earning less than 10,000 rand a month. Think about that just for a moment. 10 grand. Doesn't buy you a lot of papsak. It doesn't buy you a lot of anything. Super stressed part of the country, right? 54% of those people rely 100% on social grants to put food on the table. About 50% of the food consumed there is unpackaged goods. So really, really stressed out part of the economy. Then you've got this little middle section. We call it the middle market. It's about 10 million adults living in households earning 10 to 40K a month. And right at the top, tiny little group, 5% of the population, about 3.5 million adults who live in households earning 40,000 Rand a month or more. So what we've been doing for the last 10 years is understanding the top two pieces of the triangle. It's about 13.5 million people. We call it the consumer class in South Africa. The reason this is a sort of important picture to keep in mind is that if you're selling primary goods, right, primary food goods, you're selling into this whole triangle. The moment you start selling bottled wine, you're probably moving more into the blue area. And when you start talking about Sadi class or Alhet class wines, you're definitely right at the top of that pyramid. Yeah? So we've always thought this is a super, super important group of people to understand. Apart from anything from a social perspective, if the 70% at the bottom are relying on social grants to live, we better make sure that the guys who live above them who are paying the taxes are doing okay. Because without those taxes, the guys at the bottom are really starving. You know? So that's the work we do. The survey we do every year is called Brand Map. We get about 35,000 South Africans to answer a survey. And that's the basis of a lot of the thoughts I'm going to put on the table for you today, is this survey. What are the stories that we can tell out of it? And it's only talking about those 13.6 million people. And in fact, for the purposes of today, given the kind of wines that I know we're about to be tasting in a few hours' time, can't wait, the focus I've actually got is at the top. Okay, I'm going to put a filter on everything I'm telling you today, just about those 3.5 million adults at the very top of the pyramid. Okay. So, what is the consumer class? If you hear me use the term, it's very simply this. It's an American concept. The idea is that there's a group of people who can freely buy things other than what they need to survive. Freely. We're not saying the people at the bottom don't. It's just they can't really freely, right? If you're living in a household earning less than 10K, every pair of pants that you buy is a meal that you're not going to eat. You know? If you're living at the very top of the triangle, every pair of pants you buy is something you might never wear. You know, it's a very different picture. Okay, so this is the starting point for context, guys. This Gini coefficient is what I've just shown you here, right? South Africa's world champions at very few things. We're world champions at under 12 illiteracy rates. We're world champions at the Gini coefficient, and we're world champions at rugby. Yeah, a little round of applause. No, you can't applaud that. I mean, it's just a joke. Okay, so that's a poor picture that I just showed you. It's a slightly worrying picture. Okay, is there good news? Well, here's the super good news, guys. According to the SA Treasury Department, that consumer class is growing at an average of 5% a year. Okay, inflation's 3.5, maximum 4. This group of people is growing faster than inflation. Okay? The consumer class of South Africa is actually growing. But more radical, the top end is growing at about 12% a year. So we live in a country where a lot of what we read is about what's the bad stuff that's happening, right? It's like unemployment's rising, more and more people doing this, more and more younger people. But no one ever talks about the other side, you know? Yes. Oh, go. Q&A time. Yeah. Come on, let's do it. No. No, your maths is completely wrong. Thanks for the question. Right, moving on. No, what's actually happening, the group of people is only growing at 5%. Population's growing at 2.2, okay? So what's actually happening is that the Gini coefficient is now actually happening within the consumer class. Once you got a job, once you got education, and you live in South Africa and you work in South Africa, there's a very good chance you're going to get wealthier. That's the point. So the top end is growing. We'll have a maths moment later, if you'd like, Dave. All right, so given that context, you would imagine that any goods and services that are sold into the top end of the triangle, into the further up, are going to be increasing in sales every year. And that's actually true. There's a lot more Manolo Blahnik, there's a lot more Hermes, there's a lot more fancy cars, there's a lot of things going on that are doing incredibly well. But how come wine sales in the first quarter of 2025 are down 5%? So Rico is going to be sharing some thoughts there and giving you some actual real numbers. But when you talk about wine sales in South Africa, somehow not keeping pace. And if we look at them as a total category, it's not keeping pace with the consumer class or the top end. What's going on? Well, it's not a South African problem. It's a bloody global problem. How's this? 2024 global wine sales, the lowest since 1961. I know it seems impossible, but not even I was born back then. 1961. Guys, this is ridiculous. Like, what is happening? You look at the actual figures, the USA, the biggest wine market in the world, wine sales down 5.8%. That's frightening, but not nearly as frightening as this. Because when the French stop drinking wine, we're in real shit. You know? I mean, madness, right? Okay, so what's going on? What's going on? That's the big question that we've been trying to answer. And one of the first places that everybody goes to when it comes to, like, what's going on, we all start blaming young people. Yeah? It's always it's the bloody youth, isn't it? So there is some truth to that. There's some truth to it because we are an incredibly young market. I'll show you in a second just exactly what that looks like. But remember that the median age in South Africa is 27. 27. In the US, the median age is about 34. The only country that I can find that has a younger population than us is Nigeria, 18. Yeah? So we're a super, super young country. There's a strange demographic in South Africa, and the youth are a big piece of the marketplace. Okay, is it all their fault? So you'll hear lots of things like this, like, oh, you know, younger consumers, they're all health conscious, and younger consumers are doing this, and and it's true that they are actually, younger people are drinking less. I mean, drinking and driving used to be a sort of competitive sport for some of us in our university days, where it's not anymore, okay, clearly. And there is some evidence that this sort of behavior is true, right? Drinking less, but drinking better. If you don't believe me, go and look at some of the stats on something like Aperol. You know, there used to be a time when, in my little local bar in Cape Town, I used to watch students come up and the female students would be buying 4 or 5 ciders in a night. Now it's 1 Aperol for $140. You know? 44% up year on year, Aperol. Mad. So it doesn't mean that there isn't opportunity for growth, right? But we do have a bigger problem than just youth, guys. So what I'm going to show you now, this is with a top-end filter. In other words, I've taken all of the data I have. I put a 40,000 Rand household filter on, and we ask these people like 250 questions. Here's a question that we ask them. Which of these things can you see yourself doing in the near future? And a full 30% say drinking less alcohol. Drinking alcohol in itself, it's just not as cool as it used to be, right? It's not cool to be drunk anymore, and it's bloody dangerous. That's actually the main reason quoted by young people as to why they don't drink as much. Scared of what might happen when they're drunk. You know, that's a global phenomenon, and I think probably in the South African context, probably even more acute. You know? And more than that, 10% of them said giving up alcohol completely. It's like, what the hell is wrong with these people? What's the good news? Well, the good news is if we take that whole consumer class, right, the 13.6 million people, and we say, do you drink alcohol? 75% of them still do. That number's been completely consistent for the last 10 years, right? There's a lot of things that 25% of people and 75% do. 25% of the population are couch potatoes, 75% get some form of exercise. 25% are teetotals, 75% drink. Yeah? 37% of those people who drink wine. Well, that's not a bad number either. It's like, okay, so we've got some numbers going. That's about 5 million consumers, people. Right? So right now in South Africa, in the consumer class, in the top 2 pieces of that triangle, there's 5 million people out there that you could sell a bottle of wine to. Yeah? Of them, if you put the little triangle on, about 1.6 million are top enders. So there's a really interesting number for anybody out there who's got a bottle of wine trying to sell it for like $200 or more. Because I reckon there's not a lot of people outside of that top triangle who are going to be dropping meaningful cash on, you know, Saudi class wines. You know? It's just an expense thing. It's just a number. It's a pure number. So 1.6 million. I love that. Who on earth are these people, though? Like, what do they look like, and where are they? So let's start with where they are. Remember that Gauteng only has 18% of the total population. Cape Town only has 14% of the total population. But when you put a top-end filter on, this is what that 3.5 million group at the top, that little top piece of the triangle, this is what it looks like. 41% live in Gauteng. Yeah, Gauteng is the market for top-end products. So this is just, Dave, this is maths. Because this is maths, because it's just a pure ratio, right? If you're selling top-end products, you're a complete nana if you don't put 40% at least of your effort into understanding what's going on right here. Yeah? The Western Cape does skew. It's got a much smaller part of the total population, but thanks to a whole bunch of people moving there, it now has 27% of the top-end population. Yeah? Really, Cape Town's becoming almost as unlivable as Jan Smuts at sort of 7 in the morning. It's horrible. Anyway, I mean, it's beautiful, but it's packed. And it's packed with rich people. You know? It skews heavily as a top-end province. So that's what it looks like, and that's really why we're here. We're here because of this picture. Now let me show you the real problem when it comes to understanding that the people who make the wine see one world, and the people who drink the wine are living in another. You know? I call this the Afrigalapagos. We all think we live in a country with sort of attached land masses. I think we live in 9 different islands. They speak 9 different languages, and they're completely different from one another. It's the Afrigalapagos people. And if you don't believe me, check this out. Just 2 demographics, age and ethnicity, show the real story about the challenge for wine producers and wine consumers. This is the top-end filter, so the 3.5 million people, this is how different they look in Joburg to Cape Town. Look at the age difference in Joburg, right? If you add the numbers up, I'm now going to be picking on you, Dave, every time there's a maths question. If you add the numbers up, in the Western Cape, 32 plus 19 is 51% of top-end wine drinkers are are over the age of 50. In Gauteng, it's a very, very different picture. Much younger, 60% under the age of 50. Okay? What does that mean? Well, there's a natural thing that comes with age in South Africa, and it's the ethnic picture, right? So in the Western Cape, if you poke your head into an event like this, a top-end sort of wine tasting event, what you're likely to see is 50% of the people in the room over the age of 50, and about 70% of them will be white people. If you do the same thing in Gauteng, about 65% of the people in the room will be black, indigenous people of color. So, the blue guys are trying to market wine to the gold guys. That's ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous. But seriously, that is the problem. Okay, the ethnicity is more just for shock effect, guys. It's the age thing I think we've got to worry about. It's understanding the age shift. Because those blue guys in the Western Cape grew up knowing what Blauwklippen is, what Meerlust is, you know, what Nederburg and the Coöperatiewe vir Wynvervoer de Gerst and all of those things. But the gold people didn't. They didn't. So there's a huge kind of new-to-category, legacy-free consumer issue for me in wine. It's not just in wine. There are lots of products. Ask Volvo cars. You know, we told them 7 years ago that they were going to end up pulling out of South Africa because they just didn't believe this picture. So we've got to believe this picture. This is what the world looks like. And that is the great challenge for today. That's what we're here to talk about. How can we get the blue guys to start talking to the gold market? Yeah? Obviously, in the research we do ask a whole bunch of questions. I mean, wine is just one tiny little part of it. But we do ask this question, and I think it's the starting point for understanding what the kind of market effects could be if I'm right. You know, if the comms are not really what we'd like them to be, can we actually see an effect? So here's the difference between people. You'll see at the bottom, top-end wine drinkers is the filter. Top-end wine drinkers in the Western Cape versus Gauteng. Simple question. What red wines do you mostly drink? Merlot has always been the number one choice. I've had massive arguments with wine producers in the Cape about that. They don't believe it because they don't like Merlot. But we're telling you it's a fact, and Rico will tell you that Merlot is the most bottled red wine in South Africa. Most bottled. Not the most bagged necessarily, but the most bottled. Okay, so look at this picture. What's it telling us? Well, it's telling us that in the Western Cape, we're a little bit more likely to drink Shiraz, more likely to drink blends, more likely Pinotage. For me, it basically says Gauteng winos are just heading for the safe places here. You know, Merlot is a safe thing to drink. Cabernet is a safe thing to order because it sounds like you know what you're talking about. Bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, please. Sounds like you know what you're talking about, right? Okay, not a heavy skew though. Maybe the Shiraz is a fairly heavy skew. I think that's just because we're alcoholics. Anyway, what about white wines? So this is where the story starts to get interesting for me. Because white wines, you'll see a fairly level playing field, right? Sauvignon Blanc, I think it's mostly because of a delivery thing. There's more Sauvignon Blanc around than anything. Also, it's pretty obvious. Chardonnay, again, you Google what white wine should I try first, you'll get Chardonnay, okay? So safe havens. Look at Chenin Blanc, though. So you today are going to be tasting some of the finest Chenin Blancs probably in the world, you know. We in the Cape have been drinking Chenin Blanc now for 20 years as a preferred drink. You know, it's for those of us who like food and wine, there's no way that you can beat Chenin. On a value proposition, Chenin is just extraordinary. It's full of character. We've known all about this. But for some reason, like up here, you guys have never even heard of the Loire Valley. Google it. Google it. Not you, Colleen. You're basically from Cape Town. Okay, so this, I mean, do you see where I'm coming from? That was very Donald Trumpy. Do you see where I'm coming from? Do you see where I'm coming from, though, guys? That doesn't happen by accident, okay? That happens almost by design, and I think it's poor design, because I think that shows that there is opportunity. Something's kind of going wrong, and there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity to educate the market outside of those pretty mountains and the winelands. Yeah, simple as that. There are a couple of other big things at play here. So I'm just going to drop these in right at the beginning of the day so that you've got context. One of the other big problems is that these people in South Africa, this top-end wine drinker, they live in a very promiscuous world. One of the biggest things we find in our research is that as you go higher up that triangle, consumer choice becomes sort of increasing. It increases, right? When you're at the bottom, you can probably only walk to one grocer. When you're at the top, you can drive to Checkers, Pick and Pay, whatever, and you can use Checkers 6060. Okay, so it's a promiscuous world. And when it comes to wine in particular, or booze in particular, cross-consumption is a massive, massive issue. So the wine industry isn't in competition primarily with the wine industry, right? Wine is in competition with everything else. That is what top-end wine drinkers look like as a cross-consumption category, right? So 39% of top-end wine drinkers also drink beer, and about 85% of them are male. So that's taking the male side of the wine drinking thing out. It's like beer or wine. And then you've got gin, cider. Look at these numbers. They're huge, guys. You know, consumers have a massive menu. They've got huge, almost unlimited choice. You know, and wine has to compete in there. So we've got to give these people better reasons to drink wine than to drink one of these other categories. How do we do that? They also live in a cluttered world. So this was the beginning of about 2 years ago, I got a bit fascinated with this idea of walking into a Pick and Pay and seeing people with what I call the 1,000-hour stare. You know, it's like I don't know what wine. There's just too many. There's too many wines, right? And then I read my friend Christian Eads from Wine Mag. He published this story back in 2024. It was the review of the Vineymark report, and this thing caught my eye. Right? He said, of the 1,121 brands surveyed, top 4% generate 80% of the sales. How mad is that? How mad is that? So this incredibly cluttered world, and everyone ends up going, Nederburg Merlot. Yeah. It's a bit crazy, right? That number is even more frightening. 9,296 SKUs, and 5% generate 80% of the sales. But it's the 9,000 SKUs that freak me out. If I'm a new-to-category consumer, if I didn't grow up looking at the pretty mountains with the winelands within walking distance, how on earth am I supposed to know what the difference is between 9,296 SKUs? It's bloody impossible. It's almost hard enough to know the difference between Chenin Blanc and Chardonnay. Mm-hmm. You know? And now you want me to... Somebody's got to educate us. It's not stupidity, it's just lack of information. Again, That's the reason why we're here today. Think about it like this, just a little visualization for you. You know, imagine being a consumer right now of wine as a new to category consumer. I think the world looks like this. I bought this for somebody I really didn't like for Christmas once. It's clear, it really is. It's clear. The most evil thing about this puzzle, actually, if you can't see it, is that some of these pieces down here have 3 straight edges. So just when you think it's a shitty puzzle, then you find you've actually got pieces that are fake edge pieces. Anyway, that's what the wine market must look like, guys. I think it must be very, very, very confusing. Okay. So, what is the hope? Well, first of all, take with you the idea that the market is growing. Okay? That is a fact. It is a fact that the market for premium wine, and remember premium wine is anything sort of in a bottle. Tussies is the beginning of premium wine, technically. That market is growing. And they are clever, they are educated, they desperately want to know more, they're keen to drink wine, they just don't know enough. You know? And I'm not in the habit of quoting people, but I think Seth Godin is one of the few marketing sort of influences worth quoting. This is the comment that he made that will always stick with me, this idea that people don't buy goods and services, they buy relations and stories and magic. And I really, as a marketing consultant, who's spent 12 years trying to educate corporate South Africa on how to connect with consumers right now, I absolutely believe this. I absolutely believe it. Where does wine fit into that? So relations is the idea that we want to connect to human beings, right? We don't just want a nameless, faceless thing. We want something that can connect with a human being or a community. You're about to experience 28 people in there who are directly involved with the thing that they make. You can ask these guys which way the wind was blowing when they made that wine, and they'll tell you. You know, directly, intimately connected with the product, with the land, with everything that they do. Wine is all about people. It's all about relations. Every single bottle of wine has a story behind it. Every single bottle. It's not like beer. You know, every bottle of Heineken was just a bottle of Heineken. You know what I mean? So there's no story. Well, there's one story behind beer. It's going to be the story on the website. But every bottle of wine has a different story. You know, it's an amazing way of selling anything, is to sell the story. And magic, well, I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I've always thought that there's a certain magic in wine. The idea that a humble little fruit can be plucked off a vine and turned into something that makes you and me far more interesting than we were earlier. Okay, so that's it, guys. I think there's some good news. I think there's good news for wine. There's opportunity in the market. I see this as an opportunity, not a threat. As a Cape Townian, I hope we all embrace the threat. I hope we enjoy talking about it today. And I hope we all have a fabulous time. And that is all I have to give you this morning.